Well, thank you so very much for inviting me to join your session this afternoon. I am a Calgarian, and so it's nice to see faces in the audience, and I hope you all don't have too much snow. If it makes you feel any better, it's very wet and cold here today in Mexico City. So thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're up to in Mexico, and maybe there's some elements of what we've done here that might be helpful to you or people you know that have an interest in growing their position in Mexico, or perhaps venturing and establishing a position. And I think you've seen the video that we produced in relationship to our new partnership that we've forged with the Mexican government and the Comisión Federal de Electricidad. But let me progress, and I think you have a presentation, and if we could progress to the slide that talks about TC Energia's investments in Mexico City. Do you all have a presentation in front of you by chance? I don't. I kind of feel like Vanna White, so I'm just assuming you have a presentation. But what this?
I don't have it, but if you need it, I can find that I just received the video, but I don't recall the presentation.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I can share it with you all. So let me just talk to you about what my presentation would have told you. So my presentation would have shared with you that we've been in Mexico for almost 30 years. Actually, really important outcome of the free trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico is it gave TC Energy the confidence to adventure outside of Canada and the United States. And we were actually the first private investor to build a natural gas pipeline from to the Yucatan. And that pipeline is still in operations today. And I don't know that we would have had the confidence to do that without a free trade agreement between our three nations. Since that time, you know, we have built several other pipelines in different parts of the country, all in critical demand regions. And, you know, what one would notice about Mexico is Mexico's fuel of choice to lead their energy transition and to support the electrification of the country is natural gas. And it continues to be the fuel of choice as they're looking to modernize their electricity system and provide greater grid stability. And that is to add significant natural gas infrastructure. We have built 7 pipelines since we've been in the country, and we are in process of building 3 more. And what's really important is that gas comes from the United States. And so the majority of that supply comes out of the Permian Basin. One could technically think that a Canadian molecule of natural gas could find its way to displace where Permian gas might go otherwise. So it's really quite a good thing for North America to see the continued connectivity of our natural gas infrastructure. Natural gas, as everybody knows from Alberta, is pretty darn fungible. And we have more commodity integration and infrastructure integration in natural gas than perhaps, you know, I think oil we do as well, but it's certainly up there as we look at continental energy security and the critical things you need to have in place so that you can advance the electrification of North America, and certainly the advancement of more renewables and more battery technology. The grid depends on natural gas. And so as we look forward as to, you know, how do we continue to grow, and what were the things we looked at in Mexico that would give us confidence to deploy more capital? Our current base roughly today is about $10 billion Canadian of investments in Mexico. We are the largest Canadian investor in the country. And we recently announced a new partnership with the Comisión Federal de, with the CFE, Comisión Federal de Electricidad. And that will involve, for the first time in their 85 years, that they strike a partnership with a private entity. And through this partnership, we will jointly complete 3 pipelines. The Tula-Villa de Reyes pipeline, which serves central Mexico. The Tuxpan-Tula pipeline, which will serve, also serve central Mexico, which is the industrial heartland of the country. And we've also agreed to build together TC Energy's second offshore pipeline, which will connect from our Tuxpan facilities offshore and go down through Veracruz and then ultimately end up in the state of Tabasco. The video you saw was really a way that we wanted to articulate the fundamental social economic and environmental benefits of partnering with CFE and partnering with TC Energy. And this is a groundbreaking project and initiative for this president, who was committed to finding a way to incorporate the southeast part of the country, which has been somewhat left behind from the economic expansion that's been enjoyed by the north and the central part of the country. And so when we think about sustainability, I know in Canada and the United States, we think very much about sustainability in the terms of reducing our CO2 emissions. Well, in Mexico, when you think about sustainability, you very much think about lifting people out of poverty. And so we know for sure, because we've seen this in every jurisdiction where we've built a pipeline, you bring gas to a community, you bring hope, you bring opportunity, and you bring economic growth and development. And that is exactly what the president of Mexico wanted to see happen when we made the commitment to deploy another $6 billion with the CFE to build this offshore pipeline. And so we're quite excited about that. When we see Mexico, we see a tremendous amount of developmental capability and expansion potential. I think we're all starting to talk an awful lot more about the importance of creating more opportunities within North America, given the conflict and war that we've seen between Russia and the Ukraine, given our concerns about incremental trade with China, and just given the wealth of opportunity and resources we have within North America. And we certainly see the dialogue in Mexico very much about nearshoring, reshoring, how do you create greater continental security around supply chains and create more proximity and create greater economic and social prosperity within our own continent. And we certainly see natural gas as being a big part of that here in Mexico. The environmental benefits are also real. Mexico's energy transition is really away from diesel and coal and to natural gas. And I think one of the things we often take advantage, or we often forget in Canada, the United States, is we have a very strong electricity transmission grid. That grid is underpinned by nuclear, by coal, and by natural gas. And that enables us to add more renewables and ultimately more batteries. Mexico doesn't have that. So what we see happening in Mexico today as part of their energy transition, first and foremost for the CFE, shore up their transmission grid. And the only way you can shore up a transmission grid, in addition to building out capability, is shoring it up with electrons that show up when you want them to show up. And the best way to do that is natural gas combined cycle technology. And CFE is building, I think they have a plan of upwards of 20,000 megawatts of power over the next 5 to 10 years to add in their generation system. So how did we find this opportunity to expand and to grow? Well, we're not alone. There's lots of other companies here in Mexico that are looking to grow and are finding homes in different parts of the country. We see that in aerospace. We see it in automotive. We see it in fertilizer. We see it in electronics. We see it in high computing industries. When you come to Mexico, and maybe many of you know Mexico and have participated here, there's a wealth of economic development going on in every state. It's a highly educated workforce with great universities. We look at the technicians we have in our systems in Canada and the United States. They're qualified, capable people. But for the most part, they're not engineers. The majority of our technicians in our business in Mexico actually have engineering degrees. And so we see a very qualified workforce. We see opportunities for expansion not only in the energy field, from LNG to natural gas to power generation, but in those other sectors. And we've seen in the presentation that we'll distribute to you all, we've seen a number of investments being announced by global players that are looking to nearshore to Mexico because of the proximity to the United States. So there's some things that we've learned. I've learned some lessons in the last 18 months I've been here, but the company's been here almost 30. And so I think some of the lessons that we're learning when it comes to how do you set up a successful, sustainable business in Mexico? Well, first and foremost, don't trust the headlines. The only news I find that gets into the newspapers is bad news, and it's news that's sensationalized. You really have to dig deep and understand what's really going on in the country and what are the driving factors. And so that's one of the things that we spend an awful lot of time is interpreting what's actually going on in the country so that you don't always get biased by a Wall Street Journal headline or a New York Times headline, which quite frankly can often be co-opted by people that have an interest of their own. So how do you understand the investment climate? How do you understand the politics? One of the key things that we've done, and I think which was ultimately why we were successful here, is creating a win-win. You know, we found our pathway for this new partnership with CFE out of a period where we were looking at potential significant arbitrations. And so what we needed to do is a natural negotiation tactic is, how do you make the pie bigger? What was a win for CFE and what would be a win for TC Energy? And then we worked really, really hard to figure out, how do we make that happen? And the way we found pathways to make that happen is we worked with local politicians. The federal government is immensely important. The president in Mexico has a tremendous amount of power, especially if he gives a morning press conference, as President López Obrador does. But where the power also resides is in the states, and our state governors are also very influential and very powerful and very incented to create economic development for their people. And so we've spent a lot of time building some very important relationships with state governors, their economic authorities, and quite frankly, the people that help keep our citizens that live by our pipelines safe. So we spent a lot of time on local politics. We've looked out and seek our peers. So we've tried to learn from the mistakes we've made over 30 years, and there have been plenty. And also, what can we learn from what other people are doing, and really try and find a way to lift all ships. You know, the fact that we've made this announcement and we're investing more money in Mexico is great for Mexico, and it's great for the natural gas industry. It's great for our partners. And so, you know, as one ship moves forward, we're trying to bring the tide up with us at the same time. Social investment. Again, we do a very good job of this in Canada, but if your neighbors don't have anything good to say about you, I'm not sure who else will. And so we spend a lot of time, and we'll spend even more time trying to make sure that our neighbors trust us, they understand the business that we're in, and then we create lasting partnerships. And don't be afraid to innovate. Nobody else has ever done a private-public partnership in natural gas infrastructure in Mexico. We were the first, and we hope we're not the last. But Mexicans and the Mexican government, especially this one, are very open to negotiating and are very open to different ways of getting business done. All above board, all legal. So don't be afraid to innovate. And I think that you would find a lot of receptivity here in Mexico to create solutions that solve problems for the government, problems for the communities, and problems for our own industry. And so I'm sorry you can't see the fantastic presentation that my team built for me, but we will send it to you. But I think in a nutshell, those were kind of some of the key messages and key themes that I would want to share with you. And I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And yeah, we have an open mic here. So if somebody has a question, there is one from Cristina Castro here.
Hello, Jennifer. My name is Christina. Great to meet you. That was a great presentation. Jennifer, when you say about 50-50 win-win relationship or participation that TC and the Comisión Federal de Electricidad, what exactly do you mean by what TC is obtaining, what CF is obtaining? How can you explain that to us?
Yeah. So let me tell you what CFE needed out of the deal. CFE needed a partner that could provide them an economic solution for getting gas to the southeast part of the country. The most economic, efficient, and environmentally beneficial way to get gas to the southeast part of Mexico is offshore. And what we could offer, CFE, was a team of people that could develop an offshore pipeline inside 9 months with a high level of confidence around the cost and when we could bring that pipeline into service, because CFE is already building power plants in the southeast. That's what TC Energy could bring to the table. We've already built an offshore pipeline. Our Sur de Texas pipeline went into service in 2019. CFE is our customer for that pipeline. So they had a level of assurance that we actually knew how to develop and construct a high quality offshore pipeline. That was the win for them. They needed gas. They needed it by a certain date. and they could only pay so much. And so that was the challenge that we brought to the table. What did TC Energy need? TC Energy needed a good contract. TC Energy needed to resolve outstanding arbitrations and issues on other pipelines so we could get a return on and of sunk capital that we'd already spent in the country. TC Energy needed a partner that could help us advance on land and permitting. It's a very difficult and different permitting environment in Mexico than it is in Canada or the United States. So we needed a partner to help us do that. And we needed to know we had government support. If you hear my CEO, Francois Poirier, talk a lot about what does a company such as TC Energy need in the future to make investments, we need three things. We need to know there's strong energy fundamentals. Strong energy fundamentals exist in Mexico, high demand growth, 10% per annum in the southeast part of the country. We need a good contract. We need a good contract with fair risk allocation. And we need the support of the government. This is really important if you're building major infrastructure of any sort, but particularly major energy infrastructure. We were able to get significant support from multiple layers of the government in Mexico to build infrastructure. I think we've heard Francois and others talk about, we've had a resounding amount of support from the Mexican government to advance social and economic development in the southeast part of the country. That's what you need to build major infrastructure. So that was what we needed. And I think I shared what CFE needed.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Jennifer, thank you for your presentation so far. Great insights. Could you give us a little bit of background on making the pie bigger? I'm wondering how LNG fits into that picture.
Yeah, how LNG fits. So the world needs more LNG. Interestingly enough, in Mexico, a couple things are happening. Mexico has a ton of natural gas contracts out of the Permian. And the Permian, as we all know, is perhaps the most prolific natural gas basin in the United States. And so they've got a lot of long-term contracts out of the Permian. Pemex is also discovering more natural gas in the Gulf of Mexico. And so, we do see that Mexico is very bullish on natural gas. Mexico is also connected to the Atlantic and to the Pacific. Great proximity to clients in Europe as well as Asia. And so what we see as potential opportunities for Mexico is for those Pacific Coast clients, it may be easier to site LNG facilities on the Pacific Coast of Mexico than in Canada and certainly the United States. And so we see, I think, upwards of 3 to 4 different LNG development opportunities on the Pacific Coast of Mexico, backed by major multinational players with marketing offtakes in Asia. We also see that Mexico's looking to develop LNG export capability on the Gulf Coast. They've recently signed a deal with Germany, and a German LNG company is going to be building an LNG liquefaction facility in the state of Veracruz in the city of Coatzacoalcos. So unfortunately, Canada couldn't offer LNG to Mexico, but couldn't offer LNG to Germany, but the Mexico government stepped forward and I think just 2 weeks ago closed a deal with a German company to build an LNG facility to export Mexican natural gas to Germany. So we do see significant opportunity in Mexico to increase their LNG export capability. And the good thing is they have the pipeline capacity to do that. The pipelines are not full in Mexico. And so there's numerous different routes that you can move Permian gas to the Pacific Coast, and that you can move Permian gas actually through our pipelines to exports on the Gulf Coast, and then also Pemex increasing its domestic capability of gas as well. So unfortunately, that's perhaps not great news for Canada, but it does say what you can do if you have access to tidewater in Mexico.
Thank you so much.
So another question in the audience? There is one more here.
Hi, Jennifer. David Parker here with AP Dynamics. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear all right?
I can, sorry, yes. I tilt my ear a little bit so I can hear a bit better.
Okay, yeah. So David Parker here, AP Dynamics. Yeah, just to carry on a little bit with the conversation about LNG, and I think in the video that we saw before you started speaking, there was an indication that TC was going to be involved with the LNG project on the let me get it right, southwest.
Salina Cruz, yes.
So, we've been reading and seeing that there's talk about several more, 3 or 4 more LNG projects in Mexico. And I'm just wondering if TC is looking to be, I'm sure that you're looking to be involved in those. That would be my first question. My second question, back to Canada. What is TC maybe trying to do to accelerate growth of LNG on the east coast of Canada? So first question is, are you going to get involved in all those other ones? Second question, a little outside of your remit, but what's TC Energy doing to deal with the things like Paraguay and Goldboro and Fairhead?
Yeah. So let me talk about Mexico. And so, we're going to help any way that we can support the export of LNG from Mexico. Because I have pipelines all over the country. And if I can fill my pipe, that is a great thing to do. And so, we've recently kicked off a coalition of interested parties to help bring sound policy to LNG exports in the United States and Canada. And I think that we will work with like-minded people here in Mexico to see what we can do to create the right policy environment to support LNG exports in Mexico. The Salina Cruz LNG project is part of the President of Mexico's Transísmico Corridor, which is an economic development corridor in the southeast part of the country. This is all about his economic and social reunification of the nation. And it's very important to him as he's looking at creating industrial parks in the southeast part of the country and industrial growth out on the Pacific coast in Salina Cruz. So that was the facility, I think, that was alluded to in our video. Our pipeline, the gas Southeast Gateway pipeline, will deliver gas to Coatzacoalcos, and Coatzacoalcos is the point at which another pipeline could take gas out to the Salina Cruz on the Pacific coast. So from a Mexico perspective, we're going to do everything we can to help the government create an LNG export market, because the world needs more gas. If you create more gas and displace coal, you're going to reduce CO2 and other harmful emissions. So I think that's a good thing for us to do. We have pipeline capacity that goes to the Pacific coast. I think that we have 1, 2, 3 pipelines today that feed the Pacific coast. Our Topolobampo pipeline, our Manzanillo-Guadalajara pipeline, and then our Mazatlan pipeline also feed the Pacific coast. My director of joint ventures is sitting beside me, so I'm kind of looking at him. And then we have our Sur de Tejas pipeline and our new Southeast Gateway pipeline. Again, if they want to use if they want to use gas from the US and then export it to Europe, we'll help them create that market. So that's what we're doing in Mexico. I can't speak specifically to what we're doing in other parts of Canada, but I can say that we're very committed to creating a robust natural gas business in North America and finding economic pathways to bring American and Canadian gas to American and Canadian consumers and other consumers in other parts of the world. We think gas is an important part of the global energy mix, and certainly will do whatever we can to bring economic solutions, but I can't speak specifically about what we're doing on the east coast of the country. But I'm sure there's like 10 people in Calgary who could. So if you called our information line or somebody in Canada Gas Pipelines, I'm sure there's people there that know.
Excellent. Do you have another question? We have another one here, Jennifer.
Yeah, hi, Jennifer. You talk a lot about these new things and beautiful things that are coming. mostly for the offshore. But for the existing onshore network of pipelines, what would you say would be the most difficult challenges that you as TC Energy face day to day by day, and how Canadian companies could assist to solve those challenges?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge we have in Mexico is the biggest challenge we have in the United States and Canada, land and permitting. It is really hard to obtain permits and acquire land access in Mexico. Perhaps a little bit harder in Mexico because the whole land title issue is extremely different. And you know, I've had many conversations with my leader about, can't you just call a title company and figure out who owns the land if it was only that easy? So again, with any major infrastructure, I think you all know this, it's doing the land and permitting. Where do I see opportunities for Canadian companies? I actually see a tremendous amount of opportunity for Canadian companies. You know, definitely as we look at the energy complex and what's happening in Mexico, we bring Canadian suppliers with us. I mean, as part of Southeast Gateway Pipeline, we awarded a $500 million contract for concrete coating to Shawcor. And so Shawcor is building a facility in Tamaulipas, Mexico, to bring our pipe and coat it with concrete. There's many other suppliers that we bring with us to Mexico. I do see tremendous opportunity for Canadians in biotech, as well as agriculture, as well as in computer science, and you know, things of the more technical nature, creating those opportunities, automotive, with different states in Mexico. So I would encourage a lot of state to province or federal government to state relationships to create those economic opportunities. We recently brought the governor of the state of Tabasco to Canada for a tour of economic partnering opportunities. And he spent a bunch of time at the University of Calgary, very interested in the work that they're doing in agricultural science. He spent time with us, very interested in what we could do. Tabasco's the capital of Pemex in Mexico. They're very interested in oil and gas technology in the state of Tabasco. He also spent time in Toronto to tap into the financial markets. And you know, they're creating an interesting thing when we look at e-commerce. And so I would encourage more state to provincial relationships and finding opportunities to small, medium businesses to partner with Mexican companies. So that would be my answer to your question.
Thank you, Jennifer.
But in the particular case of TC Energy, so I was expecting to hear something more like security issues along the rights of ways or pipelines, something like that. So what about that? Those issues?
Yeah, so I think you asked me about security issues in Mexico, is that correct? And what do we, so yeah, security. So pardon me, go ahead, sorry.
This is an example, Jennifer. I refer to the security.
So security is as important to us as safety. And they're actually, for us, we manage safety and security. You know, I think we take this for granted in Canada and the United States. We have a very comprehensive security system here in Mexico to protect our frontline workers, our office workers, and the people that work on our pipelines. It runs 24/7. You know, security services are significant. And, you know, for example, in our offshore pipeline, we're hiring local cadets from the Marine Corps to man boats to accompany vessels out to our offshore pipeline vessel off the coast of Veracruz and Tabasco, because we're worried about piracy. So again, Mexico, if you work in rural areas on major infrastructure, or you have major infrastructure in rural areas, security is the top priority. To protect your assets, but more importantly, to protect your people. So it's certainly something that's very important and foundational to what we do here. So if there's security services in Canada or the United States, you know, we head security out of Calgary, but we have a full team based in Mexico City, but also spread out across the country where we have our pipelines as well.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, I want to thank you, Jennifer, for the wonderful presentation and the insights. I think, yeah, as I mentioned, TC Energy is a great example of a great Canadian company, and we are very glad to having you today here. So
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it. And good luck with the rest of your session. Congratulations.
thank you very much.